Well, and I also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today, we'll be focusing on, we'll be doing our grade 6 English lesson on subordinating conjunction. So, we'll be doing our grade 6 English lesson on subordinating conjunction. And before we start, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged into aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we are going to select the subject of language arts, grade 6. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of subordinating conjunction. So in our previous lesson, we did subordinating conjunction. I am aware of that. But we're just going to go over subordinating conjunction again and do a review. All right, so subordinating conjunction, that is our chapter. Our subject is English, which is also language arts. Grade 6. And the lessons that we will be focusing on is to identify subordinating conjunctions. All right, so subordinating conjunction, it introduces the dependent clause in a complex sentence. So basically, a complex sentence, right? It consists of an independent clause as well as a dependent clause, right? An independent clause can stand on its own and it expresses a complete thought, right? Whereas a dependent clause, it basically, it's almost like it needs to latch onto an independent clause within a sentence because it cannot stand on its own. So subordinating conjunction, it introduces the dependent clause in a complex sentence. And like we said, a complex sentence has an independent clause as well as a dependent clause. And the dependent clause, it tells you about the other part of the sentence. And like we said, this dependent clause, it cannot stand alone. The dependent clause, it needs the independent clause within a sentence. And some of our common subordinating conjunctions, right? Remember we said a subordinating conjunction, it introduces a dependent clause. And some of our common subordinating conjunctions are after, before, as, while, until, because, since, unless, although, and if. So those are our subordinating conjunctions. An example, right, is I need to return this book before the library closes. So basically, before is our subordinating conjunction, and before the library closes is our dependent clause. So basically, our subordinating conjunctions, it introduces the dependent clause. So, like we said, a dependent clause is within a complex sentence, right? It cannot stand on its own. However, our subordinating conjunction is almost like, almost like the gateway type of thing to introduce the dependent clause, right? So, in order for you, or in order to make it more easier, you need to know what your subordinating conjunctions are, because then you'll be able to identify what your dependent clause is within your sentence, right? Because if you look at this the part of the sentence that says I need to return this book, that can stand on its own, right? But if you remove that part, if you remove I need to return this book, then before the library closes, it cannot stand on its own, right? Which means that it needs the I need to return this book before the library closes. It needs that part of the sentence in order for the dependent clause to latch on to the independent clause within that sentence. And the subordinating conjunction, right? What it does is it introduces the dependent clause within that complex sentence. All right. So now here are a few dependent subordinating conjunctions. And a few subordinating conjunctions are after, although, as if, because, before. We don't usually use list, right? That is usually if you are using more, let's say, bigger words to describe something, especially when you're writing exams, not exams, like writing essays or so on. Then we use words like list, right? Because now you want to bring about more emphasis within your essays or so on, right? But these are a few subordinating conjunctions. But the most common ones, right, are after, before, as, while, until, because, since, unless, although, and if. Those are the most common subordinating conjunctions. And we said subordinating conjunctions, it introduces the dependent clause within a complex sentence. And we are doing our tutorial lesson on aplusstudents.ca, which we will always also do the test, right? So now let's go to aplusstudents.ca, and we are going to do our lesson on identifying subordinating conjunctions. All right, so a subordinating conjunction, once again, it introduces the dependent clause within a complex sentence. And the dependent clause, it tells you about the other part of the sentence, right? And a dependent clause cannot stand on its own, cannot stand alone. And once again, some common subordinating conjunctions are after, before, as, while, until, because, since, unless, although, and if. Those are once again the most common subordinating conjunctions. And remember, we just went over now quite a few ones. Even the picture that I showed you, we had more, but these are the most common ones, especially on, let's say, the grade level, right? All right, so I need to return this book before the library closes. So if we identify the subordinating conjunction within the sentence, and then we will say before. So before is our subordinating conjunction, right? And it introduces the dependent clause, which means that before the library closes, that is our dependent clause. Unless it's cloudy tonight, we will see the full moon. So basically, unless is our subordinating conjunction, but unless it's cloudy tonight is our dependent clause. We will see the full moon. So unless it's cloudy tonight, we will see the full moon. I was late this morning because I forgot to set my alarm. So because is our subordinating conjunction because I forgot to set my alarm is the dependent clause. So can you basically see that a dependent clause doesn't necessarily just have to be at the end of the, or let's say after the independent clause. It can also be at the beginning of the sentence, right? That clause can be at the beginning of the sentence, or it can be close to the end, right? As long as you identify the subordinating conjunction, because the subordinating conjunction introduces the dependent clause within a complex sentence. All right. So we're going to select the subordinating conjunction, right, within the sentence. It says, would you set the table while I prepare lunch? So would you set the table while I prepare lunch? So if we look at that specific sentence, right, the subordinating conjunction is while. And remember, we said that while it introduces, or let's say the subordinating conjunction, it introduces the dependent clause. So basically, it is would you set the table while, which is our subordinating conjunction, but then while I prepare lunch, that is our dependent clause, right? And while is our subordinating conjunction that introduces the dependent clause. All right, let's look at this next sentence. This next sentence says, unless we cooperate, we won't finish this project. So, unless we cooperate, we won't finish this project. So, we need to select the subordinating conjunction within that sentence. The subordinating conjunction which introduces the dependent clause. All right, so when we select the subordinating conjunction, we then say it is unless, right? So this is our subordinating conjunction. And unless we cooperate, right? Unless we cooperate is our dependent clause because it introduces the dependent clause. So our subordinating conjunction is unless, right? So unless we cooperate, that is our dependent clause. Right? So unless we cooperate. Turn off the burner. Turn the burner off before you leave the laboratory. So turn the burner off before you leave the laboratory. So if we identify our subordinating conjunction, it will be before, right? Let me draw the circle. So before is our subordinating conjunction that introduces our dependent clause, which is before you leave the laboratory. So we selected our subordinating conjunction, which is before. And remember, we said that the our subordinating conjunction it introduces the dependent clause within that complex sentence. All right. Now we're going to do a test, right? Which is to identify subordinating conjunctions. We need to select the subordinating conjunction. So Jenny ended her talk early since her audience looked drowsy. So Jenny ended her talk early since her audience looked drowsy. So is our subordinating conjunction since, which is in the first option, or is the conjunction ended? What is our subordinating conjunction? Is it since within the sentence or ended? All right, so if we select the subordinating conjunction, right, then we will say it is since, right? Because since also it introduces the dependent clause, which is since her audience looked drowsy. So since is our subordinating conjunction. So well done. Since is correct. We should go to the museum since we have a season pass. We should go to the museum since we have a season pass. Is it since or go? Since or go? And remember our subordinating conjunction, it introduces our dependent clause. And then if we identify our subordinating conjunction, we can say it is since, right? Because in since we have a season pass is our dependent clause. So it's option one. Yes, so well done. Option one is correct. So while Elizabeth was out, someone left a package on her doorstep. So while Elizabeth was out, someone left a package on her doorstep. Is it while, which is in option one, or someone in option two? While or someone. And remember the subordinating conjunction, it introduces the dependent clause within that sentence. All right, so if we select our subordinating conjunction, right, we will say while. Because while also introduces a subordinating conjunction, which is while Elizabeth was out. Then someone left the package on the door. So while. And while is correct. So well done. While is correct. We need to select the subordinating conjunction within the sentence. If we are lucky, we may glimpse a rare bird, or we. Either if or we. we need to select the subordinating conjunction. Is it if or is it we? All right, so if we select our coordinating conjunction, subordinating conjunction, we can say it is if. So if we are lucky, right, that is our dependent clause. If we are lucky is our dependent clause, and our subordinating conjunction is if. Bruce was nervous, although there was no reason to worry. So Bruce was nervous, although there was no reason to worry. So we need to select the subordinating conjunction. Is it although or is it there? Is it although or is it there? Option one, although, or option two, which is there. All right, so which means that if we select our subordinating conjunction, we are going to say it is although, which means that although there was no reason to worry is is our dependent clause. So although is our subordinating conjunction. So well done. I don't watch scary movies unless they are also a bit humorous. So I don't watch scary movies unless they are also a bit humorous. So is it unless or is our subordinating conjunctions they? Unless or they is our dependent clause unless they are a bit humorous or they are also a bit humorous. And if we select our subordinating conjunction, we can say unless, right? So we can say unless, which means that it introduces our dependent clause, which is unless they are also a bit humorous. So great job. Grass is green because it contains chlorophyll. Or do we say grass is green because it contains chlorophyll? So which means that our subordinating conjunction is it because or is it contains? Option one, because, or option two, which is contains. Our subordinating conjunction. Is it because or is it contains? Okay, and if we select our subordinating conjunction, we will say grass is green because it contains chlorophyll, which means that because is our subordinating conjunction, which introduces our dependent clause, which is now because it contains chlorophyll, right? Remember as much as we are just identifying the subordinating conjunction, but keep in mind that with introducing the with identifying the subordinating conjunction, know that the subordinating conjunction, it introduces the dependent clause within a sentence. All right, so we need to select the subordinating conjunction. It says before we draw any conclusions, we should collect more evidence, right? And we have again, before we draw any conclusions, we should collect more evidence. So we have before and we have should. So what is the subordinating conjunction? Is it before or should? All right, so we will then choose our subordinating conjunction, which is before, right? It is before because it will mean before we draw any conclusions, right? So before is the subordinating conjunction that we chose. So before is the correct answer. Well done. So in this case, unless we cooperate, we won't finish the project. So unless we cooperate, we won't finish the project. We need to select the subordinating conjunction. And don't worry if you're making a mistake as long as we tried. As long as we tried. So for next time, so well done though. So do we say unless is our subordinating conjunction or won't is our subordinating conjunction? All right, so we will then select unless, right? So unless is our subordinating conjunction that introduces our dependent clause within that complex sentence. Because Scott was new, we encouraged him to sit at our table. So, because Scott was new, we encouraged him to sit at our table. Is it because or is it him? All right, so if we select our subordinating conjunction, we will say it is because, which means that it is because Scott was new, right? Not him. And well done, everybody. Well done. Good trying. All right, so that is basically our subordinating conjunctions, right? And we see that with the subordinating conjunction, it introduces the dependent clause within a sentence, right? and you will find a complex sentence. And in the complex sentence, we have an independent clause and we have a dependent clause, right? And the dependent clause basically depends on the independent clause in order to, let's say, complete the sentence, right? Um, However, we use the subordinating conjunction. We use the subordinating conjunction to basically introduce the dependent clause within the sentence, right? All right, let's do an activity before we end our lesson. Not sure if you'll be able to see. Try and make it very big. So it says that we need to complete the sentence with the conjunctions from the word bank and circle the commas. So let's leave the commas. We are just going to select the conjunction from the word bank. And the first one was done for us. It says, before you go to bed, brush your teeth. So the second one says, brush your teeth, you go to bed. Is it although you go to bed, if you go to bed, unless you go to bed, because, once, whenever, before, since, while. So brush your teeth. So you need to brush your teeth before you go to bed, right? So before you go to bed, yes. It is cold outside. It is already summer. It is cold outside. It is already summer. You need to choose from the word in the box. Is it although, if, unless, because, once, whenever, before, since, and while? All right, so it's basically we say it is cold outside, although it is already summer. Right? So although it is already summer, but it is cold outside. You do not need to help me. You want to. You do not need to help me. You want to. So you can come to our house. First, number four, you do not need to help me. Do we say you do not need to help me if you want to? You do not need to help me if you want to? Or do we say you do not need to help me unless you want to? Because if sounds almost like it's like saying, I will reward you if you help me, right? But here it's like giving the person an option saying, you do not need to help me unless you want to, right? So we will then go with the word unless. So it's almost like an option that is being given, right? So unless is an option given. Let's put it like that. You can come to our house. You are in the neighborhood. This is where that word comes in. No, no problem. Remember, we are helping each other out over here. Now you can use that word. You can come to our house You are in the neighborhood. So you can either say if you're in the neighborhood or whenever you're in the neighborhood, right? So we're just gonna do the one. One more. So you can come to our house. We can then say either whenever you're in the neighborhood, or we can say if you are in the neighborhood. All right, well, let's do one more. It is late. You can have a glass of milk. It is late. You can have a glass of milk. Is it although, if, unless, because, once, whenever, before, since, or while? No, this is like a or sign. This is an or sign. So it's almost like saying or. So instead of saying or, we make that sign. So this is like this sign. It means or. So it's not like that. So it's like an or sign. So number six, right? So it says, I'm going to read your answer as well as the sentence. It says, once it's late, you can have a glass of milk. Once it's late, you can have a glass of milk. Or we can say, since it is late, you can have a glass of milk, right? So we can say maybe once, or we can say since. But I would probably go with since it is late, you can have a glass of milk. Maybe saying instead of cold drink or something, right? But that is now the end of our lesson on subordinating conjunctions, right? So remember, we said subordinating conjunctions, it introduces the dependent clause within a complex sentence, right? And a dependent clause, it tells us about the other part of the sentence that, and it cannot stand on its own, right? And we need to first identify the subordinating conjunction, which introduces the dependent clause in order to know what our dependent clause is, right? All right, so this is now the end of our lesson, grade six. Thank you very much for joining the class. Thank you very much for interacting. Remember, we are learning as much as you are learning. I'm also learning. So you should have a good evening further. Bye.